Live from TikTok, join host John Yarrow with special guest New York Times bestselling author Abigail Owen as they discuss all things sci-fi and fantasy.
Appreciate you joining. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah. So this is I just started this about a month ago, and I titled it "All Things Sci-Fi and Fantasy." And in
I love
between
it.
that time, I had a contest on my what's on my Kindle, and there were a number of books, and one of them was "Glowing Hearts" by D.D. Moore, which is a romantasy, and her fans came out of the woodworks voting for her. I was like, oh my gosh! So
No,
I
that's
actually
awesome.
wound up reading hers,
Yep.
and then I was talking to you, so I read The Road King,
Oh, nice.
and then after that, I read the Fourth Wing. So I read three romantasy books in a row. So I feel like I'm,
Welcome to the dark side of the fantasy world.
yeah, I know. So I've always been on the niche side with time travel in my books. So
hmm
we go from there. So
That's awesome, though. I love it.
yeah. So I saw where you're going to be a keynote speaker up in Michigan at a
I am.
conference.
Yeah, it's my
That's
first time
cool.
doing a keynote, so I'm really honored and really nervous.
Yeah. Oh, you'll be great.
Thanks.
So, yeah. So how'd you get into writing, becoming an author? What's
Oh
your
gosh.
story?
So, I think like a lot of writers, I started writing when I was really young. I remember winning second place at a
Yeah.
contest in school when I was about 8, so like third grade.
Yeah.
And that kind of gave me the bug of like, maybe I'm very good at this. And I started writing short stories, which I continued all the way until high school when Mean Girls convinced me that I was weird for being a writer and liking, the
Yeah.
fantasy stuff that I liked and the romance stuff that I liked, and stopped for a while, picked it up again after college. And my two favorite genres are romance and then sci-fi fantasy. And so I had tried probably to write, it was like 30 or 40 contemporary romances that I never finished. I'd get like
Yeah.
100 pages in and I couldn't figure out where to go with it. And it wasn't until Twilight came around that I realized you could combine those two favorite genres.
Oh,
And
nice.
I finished my first book in like 6 weeks. Like I just had to find my niche.
Ah, so you wrote Road King was your first book?
No, actually, it was a book called Blue Violet, which is now
Okay.
I call it one of my vintage titles, and it's only available like on my Shopify store.
Ah,
Um,
ah,
and so, yeah, and I started out self-published, and just kind of grew from there. And I'm what I call a hybrid author now. I do both self and traditional published, and I love it.
okay. So how long have you been writing?
So let's see. I finished that book 2008, but then it kind of sat under my bed for a little while until I found an editor to work with and decided to self-publish it, which was in 2012. So it's been about 13, a little less than
Oh,
13 years that I've been a published author. 3 pen names and over 50 books at this point.
wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's pretty prolific. I have two practice novels that once I get to the point where I don't have a day job, I'll probably go back and clean them up because I don't feel like they're at the level they need to be published, right?
Yep.
So I have the first book, Future's Dark Past, came out a couple of years ago, and then the second book just released ebook a couple of weeks ago, and the hardback will come out in April
That's awesome.
through the
Happy book
publisher.
birthdays.
Yeah. So
I love that.
excited about that.
Is your
Um,
favorite part so I find that there's two kind of big moments with each book. One is the day that I write the end, even though I know that there's a ton of editing to do next. The bulk of the work to me is done at that point. And then the other is release day is like just like the biggest high.
yeah, those are two of my favorite times. Or when a scene just clicks in my head.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
go, yes, that's what I need. And, sometimes I write myself into a corner and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of that, right? And then
Yep.
I figure it out. So that's always
Yeah.
fun. So,
That's always the best feeling. You have to I've got to get home right now so I can finish this.
yeah, exactly. Or sometimes it's in the middle of the night. On my
Yep.
novella, I woke up at 2 a.m. and my wife came down at 4 and I was just finishing the outline.
Yep.
And I never write outlines. So, Well,
Oh, so are you a pantser?
I pretty much am, but with my publisher, because it was a trilogy, he requested that they wanted to see the outline for book 2 and 3.
Yep.
So I said, okay. So I wrote an outline, and at the very end, I put, I reserve the right to change any and all things based on character
Yeah.
development.
This is not going to be where it ends up. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So,
That's awesome.
and I write with my wife. So there's been times where she goes, "That's not what's in the outline." I said, "Did you read the last line of the outline?"
Yeah, there's already a caveat. I have rules.
Yeah, exactly. So,
That's hilarious. I'm
so
somewhere between a pantser and a plotter. I started out as a pantser. The very first book I
yeah,
wrote, I wrote the scenes that I could see vividly, not
yeah.
even in any order, and then I figured out a plot to connect them later. And I don't recommend that method. But now I have like spreadsheets upon spreadsheets of these master plotting lists that I don't necessarily fill them out, but I use them as like brainstorming tools when I'm trying to figure out where to go next.
Yeah, so for the trilogy, I think I was halfway through the second book, when the ending jumped into my mind. So I turned around and wrote the epilogue to the whole series. So I
Yep.
said, well, at least I'm not like George R. R. Martin, where I never write the last part.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
got it down. So
Give us an ending, please.
yeah, exactly. So what is your favorite thing to read besides romantasy?
Oh, I read just about everything, really. My mom was an English teacher, so
Yeah,
I was introduced to the love of reading very early on. But I will say, in general, fantasy, romance, sci-fi, those three are like my favorites.
yeah,
Like overall, in the romance space, my mom got me started in the romance space just reading like kind of historical romance.
yeah.
Early on. And then what really introduced me to sci-fi fantasy was, well, obviously in the movies, the Star Wars movies, but the original Thrawn trilogy in the
Okay.
Star Wars universe, which that just gave me such a love of I
Yeah,
think the world building in it was just too amazing.
yeah. So what area of the country do you live in?
I'm in Texas. I'm in Austin.
Oh, my daughter lives in Austin. I live up in Plano, in the
Oh,
Plano area. Yeah.
my husband's
Fun.
family is from Plano. So yeah,
Okay.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, we're up there all the time.
Yeah. Small world.
That
Yeah.
is, that is small world. How
I go
funny.
down every 2 to 3 months and see her and her boyfriend. And
Nice.
my other daughter, my oldest daughter, lives in Denver
Okay.
with her husband. She just had a little girl, so we spent some time up there with her.
Oh, is
So
that your first grandbaby?
second.
Second
So
grandbaby.
yeah.
That's
She has a
awesome.
little boy too. He's 3.5. Although a week and a half into it, he told her that she could go ahead and put that baby in the trash if she wanted to.
Oh,
So,
okay.
oh, okay, he's going to be an author, or a writer. He's figuring things out. So,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah. My dad's side of the family's from Texas, so I grew up in this area and went to Texas A&M and yeah.
okay. I have a foster son who went to Texas A&M, so
Nice.
we're familiar with them. My big brother went to A&M. He's a veterinarian.
Okay. Yeah, they've
So,
got a huge vet school.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm fourth generation Aggie, so it goes back to my great grandfather
Oh my
who was
gosh.
class of 1912.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
We're hoping to get our oldest in there, so
There you go.
carry on the
It gets
tradition.
harder and harder, doesn't it?
Yep. That's
Yeah.
at least that's where he's applying. So yep.
Yeah. So what are you currently working on?
So at the moment, I always have multiple things going on. I just got edits back on the Games Gods Play Book 2,
Okay.
Things Gods Break, and then I have a new idea that I actually just pitched to my editor today. So I'm going to probably start on that as soon as I'm done with the edits and try to get that done first, and then I'll write Book 3, which is the last book in the Games Gods Play trilogy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have several questions from your fans.
Oh, okay, great.
I trimmed them down, and so let me go through these, and I'll start. This one's from Danielle. And she said, "If you could be any character in your book, who or what would you be, and why?"
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Because I would usually say, I would say that Lyra, my main character from The Games Gods Play, is the most like me. Like, she's the most me that I've ever put on page.
Okay.
And I have just a fun time with her because she allows me to kind of put my snarky sense of humor out there in the world in a way that's not as mean as mine is.
Yeah.
And so I enjoy her, but actually, if I could be any character, I think I would be Aphrodite. I had so much fun writing her character. She's just this fun combination of like irreverent and yet kind of subtly powerful, and has a chip on her shoulder. Like she just was really a joy to write.
Oh, cool. All right. This one's from Elizabeth. She's a book influencer as well, book talk influencer. What is your favorite romantasy book other than yours?
Oh, that is a hard question. Oh gosh. I would probably say of the ones that I've read this past year, there's so many good ones. Like you're making past year. There's so many good ones. Like you're making me choose between my children practically. And I'll list off a few of the good ones that I've read recently. So, fairly recently, and because I'm Red Tower, I get a lot of their books early, which means I've read a lot of Red Tower books.
Okay.
Obviously Fourth Wing is up there. I would say Heavenbreaker was up there. That one's a really cool sci-fi, like kind of Pacific Rim in space. That was fantastic. And that's by Sarah Wolf. I would say Nine-Tailed by J.C. Lee, which is kind of got a Korean-based mythology to it with a nine-tailed fox. That one was fantastic. Forged in Blood by Ehibo Okasan was really great. Let's see what else. A Drop of Venom by Sajani Patel was fantastic. I've got a friend of mine, Kate Ballinger, her book, Original Sinner, I got to read early, and that's coming out in March. That one's fantastic. That's a Lucifer kind of modern day romantasy. So yeah, love. I get to read them all the time, which is also awesome.
There you go. Dee Moore, who's another romantasy author, she wrote the Glowing Hearts series. She asked, when writing your stories, have any side characters become more important than they were supposed to be, and how did you handle that?
The side characters always become more important than they're supposed to be for me. I don't know about you, John, but for me, the characters are real people that talk to me in my head and tell me what they're supposed to be doing. So it's frequent. One of the nice things about writing in the romance kind of subgenre is that frequently we can do either spin-offs or separate books that then explore those side characters and give them their own happily ever afters. And so that happens more often than not, is I'm like, okay, this one needs another, I need another book for this character.
Yeah.
So more often than not, they end up just getting their own books, but sometimes they'll take over the scenes, which is kind of funny.
I have that as well. The characters play around like all week, a lot of times at work, or would be thinking. And I take Saturday and Sunday mornings, I do my creative writing, and then I do my editing during the week.
Nice.
But the main character started out being this FBI AI guru agent, Hunter Coburn, and then he meets Kristen Winters, who's from the future, and she's gone through genetic modifications to survive the wormhole, and she just started growing and growing, and by the end, she was the main character. So I had to go back to the beginning and write a whole new beginning with her as the main character. So that's, but she was supposed to be just his foil, but they wound up being a team and equal, and so.
I love that. I love it when characters do that. And it's funny because, a lot of authors will say characters are very real to them, and I think a lot of readers don't necessarily understand why until just recently there was a study that was done with an article excuse me with an article about it that said they took images of the brain while somebody was reading and determined that when they're reading, the same centers of the brain light up as when you're talking to a real human being. And so our brains chemically can't figure out the difference between a character on page, and it happens specifically when we read. I don't know about when we watch movies, but specifically when we read. And so to me, that means that if you're an author and you're writing those characters and you're living with them so intimately for so long, they're even more real to your brain. So I think that's why.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I've been writing since college. I wrote some short stories in high school, but I really got interested in college. I had a professor who really encouraged me, and he had a writing group called the Creation Factory Writers Workshop, which I thought was very impressive to be part of. But but I learned a lot from that, and I just started writing and kept going. And then, but when I met my wife and we started having children, I had to pick because I was a teacher. I was an English teacher and a coach.
Okay. Yeah.
At the time.
Oh,
so
that's a lot. My sister is a teacher and coach. And so, yeah, we don't see her from August to April.
Yeah. So I had to kind of pick between spending a lot of time writing or spending a lot of time with my kids. So I picked spending time with my kids, and then, which I don't regret at all. It was a great time. Right. But then when my son got his driver's license, and then the other two were off in college, and nobody was home anymore. It's like, oh, I got all this free time again. And so I started writing again.
Yes.
Because they just started coming back into my mind. So,
oh, yes.
So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but at least I get it out on paper.
Well, what I love is that it's a passion that you can pick back up at any point in your life. Like, you can go down and pick it back up, and you don't necessarily lose there's other, I would say, physical hobbies, for instance, eventually your body just kind of gives out on you, and maybe your mind eventually does too as you get older. But I like that we can, my family will often ask me 50 books in, when are you going to quit? And I'm like, probably never. I keep coming up with more ideas.
Yeah. So Kami is another author and book talk influencer, and she writes, of the gods and goddesses, who was your favorite one to write, and who was your least favorite or more difficult to write? I think you said Aphrodite, so you already answered half of that. But
yeah. Well, and Hades too, because obviously he's the lead character hero. And he was so fun to write. I love my morally gray heroes, but Aphrodite by far, just because like I said, she was just, the things that would come out of her mouth were hilarious, but she also has this chip on her shoulder that I think makes her feel more. I think a lot of the Greek gods, what's interesting about them is that they reflect our humanity quite a bit. And so that I liked building that into her. I would say the more difficult gods, believe it or not, so you would think that I would just can't stand Zeus, but I think everybody can't stand Zeus because his history basically makes him kind of an unlikable character. So actually, for me, it was fun to actually lean into that perception of him. In book 2, you start to find out a little bit about why, in my world, he is the way he is. But in book 1, I just leaned into he's a jerk. So that actually made him easy to write because, you can just kind of play with that in all its forms. But Hermes, believe it or not, ended up being harder because my main character, Lyra, it belongs to the Order of Thieves, and Hermes is the god of thieves. And so you would think that would make him more of a heroic god in her eyes. And she does say oh, he's my favorite god. But then we start to actually get to know him, and he ended up being kind of a jerk too. And so,
oh God.
Yeah. And so that ended up making him this kind of character for me where I was I feel like I should like him, but I don't. And that's just kind of how he came out on paper. So that made him a little trickier to write.
So who's your go-to person to bounce stuff off of when you're writing?
Oh, I have several. I very much trust my editors. So, when I'm really stuck, I definitely go to them with okay, here's where I'm, stuck. I have, I've been doing this so long at this point that I also have a lot of writer friends who, we bounce things off each other all the time. So Nicole Flockton and Kate Ballinger probably are the two, and Avery Flynn also. I talk to them the most regularly. And so having just, minds that work similar to mine, just to be here's where I'm struggling. And they go, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I go, okay, that's where I was, missing.
Yeah, that's nice.
It's fantastic.
Now, does your husband help you ever?
He does, but he'll be the first to tell you that he tends to read nonfiction, not fiction books. And so he's like, I don't know, half the time. But he'll give me good, like, if I'm really stuck in a logical space, because he's a computer engineer, and so he's very, very logical. And so if I'm stuck in like a logical space, or like this isn't working, he can give me good logic, like he'll logic me through things. So that's good.
Yeah, I think Leanna was saying, I'm scrolling. Is that why I get crushes on the book Boyfriends? It's the science.
It's just, exactly. They're real in your head, Leanna.
Yeah. I guess so. I never thought about it that way. Although there were a couple times in the Rogue King and even in the Fourth Wing where I kind of blushed because I'm not used to that kind of stuff. I was like, whoa, it caught me off guard.
Things. Well, and especially Rogue King, that one's pretty high heat.
Yeah. So I do remember a few years ago, I picked up a science fiction book that was I don't even know if there's a term for science fiction romance like there is for romantasy, but I got to a part where I was like, oh, that's not what I was expecting in a sci-fi book.
I see. Yeah. Well, and there's so many different, I think there's different levels of spice that you can get. There's different levels of worlds you can get. It's, so it just adds that blending of those two genres, just gives you so many different ways to go.
So, high fantasy is really focused on being in a completely different kind of world. How did you wind up merging that kind of fantasy with modern day, like in the Rogue King and that? How did you come up with that idea?
It's fairly common in the paranormal romance space, I think, because a lot of paranormal romance is things like vampires, which are, set in modern day, usually modern day. Sometimes they're but they are certainly, on this earth in this time frame. Or you get, werewolves, shapeshifters, that kind of stuff, witches. And that's really where I started, because for the most part, after the following kind of the Twilight heyday, that's where a lot of the romance was into those spaces with, vampires and shifters and things. And so that's really where I got my start. And then I did, because the world building by far is one of my very favorite things to do in the fantasy space. I did write a full epic fantasy in its own separate world, and I loved doing that. And I would love to do that again. But I will say that with when I returned to modern was with the Greek gods, it still felt very romantasy with me, even though it's now set modern in this current world. The amount of world building that you still have to do, to me, feels similar. So for me, it's about what about this world is going to impact the characters and the plot. And that's true no matter kind of what world you're putting it in.
It becomes kind of the epic fantasy at that point, right? Where it's just more about the story.
Exactly.
So the fantasy books you wrote, were those under a pen name or?
No. The Liar's Crown. It's through the Dominion series with the Liar's Crown.
Okay. And what sparked the idea for this series, the Crucible series? How did you decide, I'm going to write about gods?
Yeah. So I was actually finishing the third book in the Dominion series, and that book, in that world, it's a system of goddesses. And that at the beginning of the series, the goddesses are, they haven't been answering anybody for a very long time, and nobody knows kind of where they've gone. And then towards the third book, I get to explore them a little more. And so I was like, I'm really enjoying playing with the goddesses right now. I maybe I should do like a spin-off series, maybe, or like a series of prequels that explore their stories more. And so I was kind of playing with that idea. And then I came up with the idea of combining it with trials. And the problem was with that with the world that I'd already established with those goddesses, the trials didn't fit the story or the world. And so I was like, oh, shiny new idea. I shall go off and do combine gods and trials together. And originally I was going to do it epic fantasy style with my own entire god system, separate fantasy world. But I was basing it entirely off the Greek gods system and their primary pantheon gods. And the more I was working kind of through what that was going to look like, the more I was like, I actually think this is going to be better just straight up Greek gods, which is one of my favorite mythologies. I'm very familiar with it and love it to pieces. And so when I pitched it to my editor, I made it generic in the pitch. And then at the end of it, when she was like, I really love that idea, I told her I can go epic fantasy or I can go Greek gods. I'm personally leaning more towards Greek gods. And she was like, oh yeah, Greek gods. Let's go with that.
There you go. So you're a well-established, well-known author. There's a lot of indie authors and new authors. What piece of writing advice would you give to a new author just starting out as far as their craft of writing? What helped you the most in being able to move past being self-published into, a hybrid and even published world?
So gosh, there's several pieces of advice that I think I would give. I would say that my biggest observation of success, and whether that's success in the indie space or traditional spaces, kind of doesn't matter. It's just success overall is stick to it. This is the longer I'm in this, the longer I see that it takes for most people kind of time to build your craft, to build your own voice, and then to build an audience over time. And so, just enjoy the ride and really stick to it. So it's as long as you're still loving it, keep writing, would be my first piece of advice. I would say my second piece of advice is just to try to write consistently. The longer I write, the more it's like a muscle. So, the more you write regularly, kind of the more you're building that writing muscle. And, I personally have a big love of learning. So I love attending workshops and reading books on craft and, watching videos on craft and then trying to apply those things to my current one. So each book I hope is my writing is even a little better after, than the subsequent book. And so, I would say, try to write consistently, even if it's when I first started writing my very first two books that I finished. I was working full time in tech, so I was working like 60-hour weeks, and I was getting my MBA, and my kids were 2 and 4 years old, and I thought this would be a great time
to start writing.
Yeah. And so my goal that I set myself was like a very small, achievable goal of 100 words a day.
Yeah.
Because 100 words you can get in 5 to 10 minutes. And so even at the end of the day, I'm exhausted. It's like I can sit down still and get the 100 words, and that adds up quickly over time. So that was always, I think, one of my mental tricks to make sure I consistently wrote.
Yeah. One of the things I tell people is get into a writing group and edit other writers' work, because you learn so much by editing what you see in other people's work that you start seeing it in yours. It's not just the forest for the trees anymore. You become a better editor of your own work as well.
Absolutely. And I would also say that once you've finished a work, a lot of people think of editors as somebody that just does like the grammar and make sure that the grammar is okay. But really what you want, I always recommend, like if you're going to spend money on anything, spend it on a good developmental editor who's looking at things like the plot, the pacing, the character development, those elements.
Yeah. I think the first time I had a development in our first book of the series that we had a manuscript overview development edit, and we got back like 30 pages. I said, this is like a college class focused on my book. I was really shocked at the detail and the suggestions, and it was really good. It was worth back then it was $300, but
it's worth every penny. And that's, I think, probably my biggest learning curves have come from my editors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then for authors trying to break into the publishing world, it's so hard. Publishers won't look at your work unless you have an agent. Agents won't look at your work unless you've been published, the catch-22 kind of thing. Obviously, you broke right through that. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations for how to navigate that?
Again, I think it's more about stubbornness than anything. Also because, especially when you're doing the querying, more often than not, you're getting back a generic no that doesn't tell you why. Yeah. So you don't know if it's that they already have something like that. You don't know if it's that they don't think that particular concept is selling in the market right now. They don't know. You don't know if it's your writing. You don't know why. And so, but just about every author I talk to has a completely different path from every other author I talk to. Like mine was, I consider it kind of like gradual stair steps. So I started out indie published, loved it, started building some readers, got in with a small press, got a few more readers, got in with a medium-sized press that got me into with my agent, that got me into, so like it was just kind of a stair step process for me. But I will also say, don't, where I've done the best with people is where I've really clicked with the editor or the publisher or my agent that I'm working with, rather than just anybody to get my foot in the door.
Yeah.
Because then that relationship really, I think, impacts my writing a lot more, because there's just, I think, more there that, I don't know if it's a level of trust or if it's just that, like, I know that we're on the same page. And I think, especially when you're first starting, you're tempted to, query every single person under the sun, just hoping to get in the door anywhere.
Yeah.
And really, I find it works better for you over a longer haul of querying. Do your research. Really do your research on the editors, the publishing houses, the agents that you want to work with, and then aim at them.
Oh, good point. I see Joanna joined. She's one of our book talk influencers, so welcome. For those of you who may not know this, Abigail Owen, New York Times bestselling author of the Crucible series and a couple other series. The Road King was, what series? What was the name of that? Inferno, right? Yeah. So, so when you write, how often do you write, and what does your process look like?
So my process is pretty, I would call it regimented. I have ADHD, so like I have to have I work better on a very strict schedule.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, I'm still trying to get over this nasty cough.
Uh-oh. I did that last week during my live. I couldn't hardly talk. I was like, okay, this is terrible.
There's something going around, I'm telling you.
Well, plus our weather just changed, so all the allergies are kicking back up now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my process is, I generally write around 2,000 words a day. I walk a loop that's about an hour and 10-minute walk, and dictate into my phone. And that gets me usually somewhere between 12 and 1,600 words. And then the dictation it's actually amusing how not great it is. And so going through and fixing that and then kind of fluffing and adjusting as I go usually gets me to the 2,000 for the day. If I'm really feeling the scene, then I'll keep going. But especially now where I am, I have to spend quite a bit much more time on the marketing side of things, with social media, with putting together things for various events, kind of behind the scenes, logistics for those events, that kind of thing. So much more of my day goes towards that now than to the writing.
Oh gosh. So you're dictating while you're walking, then it prints it out for you and you put it into Word, and
I just move it over into Word because it dictates it right onto my phone. And so It's already in Word. I just copy and paste it into the bigger document and roll with
nice.
it. Yeah.
Nice. So from a marketing point of view, what I know you're on TikTok and Instagram. What else do you focus on? Do you do Facebook, or do you have a YouTube channel?
A little bit of everything. I don't do YouTube. I started out on Facebook and Twitter. Twitter was never really my favorite. I'm too wordy for their word limits. But I'm still on Facebook, and I have a Facebook private group where I interact with them quite a bit more on a weekly basis than a lot of my other social media. I'm really active on Instagram, I think, because I have a graphics background, and so I'm able to do graphics for that pretty easily. And so I do a lot
on Canva or
no, I use Photoshop, and then a tool. This is a really great tool for authors called BookBrush. I love that. And then with TikTok, I'm on TikTok. I'm still figuring out TikTok for me. So I'm not, I am not an actor, and I suck at skits or any kind of anything where I'm having to mouth words. It's just uncomfortable to do, and I'm sure uncomfortable to watch. And so I'm trying to figure out what the heck to do with TikTok.
I've been on for close to 6 months now. My original posts are really really embarrassing. I had to learn CapCut so I could actually do, because I couldn't figure out how to do editing on TikTok. It's just
It's
too
gotten better.
small, and so I prefer a big screen where I can see
Yep.
it, and so I've started doing that. And
The CapCut's great.
yeah, I love it. And so now I do things like that, and I've gotten more comfortable being on camera than I was at the beginning, because at the beginning I was trying to do a lot of posts without pictures, right, without me
Yeah.
being on, but you can only do so many of those. So,
Yeah. Well, I don't
yeah,
mind. I like public speaking, but I like it better if like on live, at least you and I are interacting. And so there's
yeah,
something more
yeah,
dynamic about it than just me being like, here, let me talk about something. And so I'll play with it until I figure out what I enjoy doing.
yeah. Joanna says all our first posts are embarrassing. I've seen a lot of hers. She doesn't ever look embarrassed. She's so smooth at it, and it's just she's a great book reviewer. So
That's
if
awesome.
you haven't checked her out, you should. So I was a few weeks ago. I was doing a live with Claude Kelly, and he's a musician, but he also does book reviews. And so one of the questions he asked me, and I thought that's a great question. I'm going to steal it. Is he said, so who would be your Mount Rushmore authors? If you had to pick 4 authors to put on Mount Rushmore, who would they be and why?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. That's a really hard question.
Yeah, I
Um,
know. That's why I said I'm stealing that, because it'd be interesting to see. It could be any genre. For me, he said sci-fi, so or
See, and like,
fantasy.
I
But
almost feel like I would need a Mount Rushmore for like my romance novels, for my romantic
yeah,
novels, for my sci-fi
yeah,
novels, for my,
yeah,
like, I need a Mount Rushmore from all of them. If I
yeah,
just did my Mount Rushmore from everything, I would probably put Laura Hillenbrand on there. She wrote like Unbroken and Seabiscuit. She's just got she's she is so readable, and yet she's writing like fictionalized history. So she's fantastic. I would put Joanna Lindsay, who is a prolific author in the historical romance space in there. Like she's who I really got started on romance with. I would probably put Timothy Zahn just because he's who got me into fantasy and sci-fi
yeah.
with the Thrawn series. I'm looking at my books right now. I'm like, who else? Like, who else? Probably Tolkien, because that was like Zahn
Yeah,
sci-fi. Tolkien was my fantasy side.
there you go. Those
Yeah.
are fun to read too.
Oh, so good.
And it's amazing how much the craft has changed since those guys wrote.
Yeah.
You know, the 25 word sentences and
Yes.
the 40 sentence paragraphs. You know, kind of
Such a different social media has changed the way that we communicate as a race,
yeah,
as a human
yeah,
race.
yeah. So I go back and read those, and it's like, oh, this is really slow, and I have to remind myself that I really loved it the first time I read it.
Yeah.
What's changed? It's because you're clicking so fast through stuff, and
We're in a
I
Twitter
notice when I
TikTok
write
world.
now, I try and write shorter chapters,
Yep.
and paragraphs are never over 4 or 5 sentences, and I
Yeah.
still have long sentences, but
Keep it
I'm
fast
trying.
and keep it short. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. And I've also noticed the same because I'm a big classic movies buff. I've noticed the same about when I go back and I watch movies from like the 1930s and 40s. I'm like, I'm pretty sure they've been in the same room now for about 45 minutes. Like, leave the room already. Like,
Yeah. So what kind of movies do you like to see in current day?
I watch pretty much every genre of movie that you can name. And
Yeah.
I'm a big movie buff. Probably just like with my reading, I'm into the rom-coms. I'm even more into the sci-fi, fantasy, and the movie space. I'm also big into action flicks.
Yeah.
And so I would say and then I'm really a big K-drama fan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What I love about those is that they're limited series, limited seasons. So it's 16 episodes and that's
Yeah.
it. So you get a beginning and an end without having to
Yeah.
go 45 seasons of 50 episodes each, with completely different characters at the end than you started with. So I like that there's that. And then I like their their overall story, their plotting method, for those at least, you can, just like with most, fiction, you can kind of see the plotting techniques. And so those just, I love them to pieces. And I know I'm going to get a happy ever after at the end of most of them.
So, is there any chance of one of your books coming to the screen?
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. I've had nibbles. I know I've had nibbles, but I don't think anything in particular is being negotiated. Of course, they just like to, so like I tend to leave that in the hands of my publisher, and I'm like, surprise me when there's a yes.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah.
So, okay. I've kind of run through all my questions. I'll open up to you. Do you have anything for me? Or, well, let's go back to, before we do that, let's go back. We talked at the beginning that you were going to be at a conference in Michigan, but I also saw you going to another. What's your schedule look like for the next month to 2 months from going to conferences kind of point of view?
In signings, I think, so I've got a little break here. I've got a book signing locally on the 5th, and then I've got a little bit of a break, which is good because we've got spring break for the kids. And then I leave, I have like book signings back to back in Michigan, Orlando, New York, and then Kansas City, and then DC, and that gets me through about April. And then I've got another break because my oldest is graduating high school. And so I wanted to take May when he's graduating to just focus on him.
Yeah.
And then I'm back.
And you can always fall back to your day job and write.
Exactly. Yeah. I kind of do have to write books in between there.
Yeah.
And then, I'm back at it in June. I'm trying to remember where I am in June, but I know in July I'm in London, and another little break in August when the kids go back to school and I'm getting him settled at college. And then, I've got, I think I have nonstop back to back, things every single weekend of September, October, and into November.
Yeah.
At this point, because that's when book 2 comes out. So that's where a lot of things are kind of.
And Joanna, we already covered her inspiration for the games God's Play. So I'm going to post this on YouTube, and you can go back to that. And then Dana said she'd like to see the Dominion series made into a show.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah. I had so much fun coming up with that world. It was a world that I actually, for that one, that's the first, I think the only time I've come up with the entire world before I came up with like the plot and the characters, because I knew who the bad guy was going to be, and I needed to have his entire backstory, which is tied to the creation of the world. And so I had to come up with like what actually happened, what the world believes happened, how we're going to find out like what happens and how it ties to the bad guy.
Interesting. My next series is called The 5 Known Worlds, and I have a novella that started it out. And of course, I have a hard time writing short stories.
Me too.
Or my publisher wanted me to write a novelette between the 2 books, and it got longer and longer. And it said, okay. And then it was a novella, and he read it. He goes, well, this really should be something separate, because this doesn't really have anything to do with your series. And so it's a mashup of sci-fi and a world where they go to a fantasy world.
Nice.
Our Earth people have traveled to Proxima B, and they land there, and they wind up in a fantasy world. That there with magic and everything. So that's going to be my next series.
I love that.
I'm starting on. So
don't you love how one project where you're like, this will just be a quick little whatever, and it just explodes.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's how it works. So. Yeah, hopefully I can retire soon and just write full time.
Now, what initially got you into kind of the sci-fi fantasy space? What were your big influences?
So I started out in high school reading Conan the Barbarian comic books, and then when I got into college, I saw a guy had a Conan the Barbarian paperback. I was like, wait, they're paperbacks?
Yeah.
And so I started reading that, and then that led me into the Lord of the Rings series and Frank Frazetta's series and a bunch of other fantasy. And then I started seeing sci-fi movies and realized there's a whole nother genre there. So I started eating those up as well.
Oh, yeah.
Started with Asimov and, some of the older people.
So would you say that, like me, kind of the world building is what captures you in the sci-fi fantasy space? Like, is that what you love the most, or is there something else?
I love to world build. I love to plop a character in there and see what happens, right?
Yep.
So I do a lot of thinking about what it should be, and but it grows too as you're writing, right? Because I don't try and build the entire system.
Yep.
I just know it's going to come, as I'm writing.
Yeah.
And then at some point I go, okay, I gotta make the backstory and create that and figure that out so that this all works. But yeah, it's a blast. So
Yep. Yeah, it is.
yeah.
It's the more I do it, the more they have to pare back my world building, really, because I love it so much. I'm like, all of these things, I'm going to put it on. They're like, okay, too complicated, bring it back down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other problem I had for a long time was I would pull what my wife calls a Tom Clancy, and I would info dump for 10 pages
Yep.
on the world, and then she would help me expand that out into pass the narrative into action, into dialogue, and spread it out versus just having it all at one place. So
Yep.
I
Yeah.
really enjoy writing with her. So it works out really well because she's more in the weeds kind of person, and I'm the big
Bigger
picture person, and so we work well together.
So I was going to say, I've worked on co-writing projects with a few people over the years, and
Yeah.
I want to say the technique that we used on the last one was we had a dual point of view, and so each of us took a point of view. But I know that writing pairs approach it differently. So how do you guys approach it?
So I compare it to like writing a song. I lay the lyrics down and the guitar and the overall melody, and then she comes in and adds the bass and the drums and helps to pull it all together. So that's kind of how we work together. But I write the first draft.
Okay.
And then she comes in and she was editing for a long time. And then one time she goes, "This is all wrong." And I said, "Well, why don't you just write that?"
Yep.
And that's how then we started. And she started helping doing that. It's like, okay. So, and it's been a learning lesson for her too, because sometimes I go, "No, that doesn't work," right? But we've worked well together back and forth. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I love
we
that
take
it
long
just
walks
came
and hash
together
things
organically.
out. Yeah. We take long walks and hash things out. So
Yep.
it was a little hard though, because before she started helping, she didn't read sci-fi or fantasy. She was a mainstream fiction person, and
Yep.
so I would say no. Every sci-fi person will know what being spaced means. Trust me, I don't have to take two sentences
you
to
don't have to
explain that.
part.
Yeah. So we get there. Joanna wants to know if you're going to be in Seattle anytime soon.
I don't have a stop in Seattle at the moment, but we're still trying to figure out stops in the fall for the official tour. So I'm hoping to add more stops. So all my stops are always on my website on abigailowen.com, and then I add them as soon as I know.
Okay, there you go. Well, we only have 2 minutes left. I know we got a late start. I appreciate your patience there.
Oh, of course.
I really enjoyed it. Anything you want to say before we turn?
We sign off.
Yeah.
No, I just named my website, so I think that covers that.
Yeah.
Like, you can follow me all through my website and all the places. And I just want to thank you very much for having me on to chat with you.
No,
This is really
I appreciate you joining. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. You too.
And okay, talk to you later. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.